Everyone, to another edition of Middays with Q. I'm your host, as always, Rich Quinones. We are powered by our good friends over at Triax 57 and Fresh Roasted Coffee. 20% off your first purchase, BYP20. As we continue with the baseball talk, it's wonderful to have our guy, a great writer from USA Today, Steve Gardner, joining us for a couple moments. I feel like the baseball season, it gets underway. We got to get back in the saddle and get our weekly spots going. And then we turn around. You got the trade deadline right around the corner. But just there's so much to get into right now with baseball. But I always appreciate a couple moments.
Absolutely, Rich. Always a pleasure to talk baseball with you.
All right, let's get into it. So we saw two teams snap slides last night, the Braves and then the Phillies. And, I'm looking at this NL East, and I mentioned this the other day. It's rare. You have Chicago, Detroit, you have the Yankees playing really good baseball, the Dodgers. Every fan base wants these guys to be 15, 16, 17, 20 games over 500. It doesn't
Mhm.
work like that all the time. But if you're a Phillies fan, you stop to slide. If you're a Braves fan, you stop to slide. Now, I think the Braves are going to be in trouble. We'll get to them in a moment. But in our backyard with the Philadelphia Phillies, I mean, there's a couple things that stand out. We know when their offense goes south, their offense goes south. We know that pitching has also been an issue. I think they have to go and get another bat. They have to solidify the outfield. I guess the first question I will ask you was is this slide a bump in the road, or are you concerned with the Phillies going forward here?
I think you have to be concerned somewhat, especially if Bryce Harper, going on the injured list, takes away one of the big bats that you have in a lineup that doesn't really have many others.
Right.
Trey Turner and Kyle Schwarber have been great at the top of the order, and Harper is, while not hitting for as much power as we normally see from
Yeah.
him, still having a pretty good season. But with those three guys, after that, where's the offense coming from? I think that's something that's got to be very concerning for the Phillies, especially with the Mets playing so well and overtaking them for the division
Yep.
lead. Yeah, I think now when Harper comes back is probably the primary thing that the Phillies need before they can truly assess what the next steps are.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost feast or famine, right, with them. I mean, it's
Hmm.
inexplicable to lose and get swept by Pittsburgh. I mean, obviously, you stopped the slide
Right.
last night with the win in extras. They just called up the kid Ott. He had a pretty good game, 3 for 4. Otto Kemp, 3 for 4. But every Philly fan wants to know, okay, when is it time to call up Justin Crawford? And I think there's pros and cons to that. Like I always look at I think there are exceptions to the rule. Like we already saw what Boston's doing. We saw what the Royals are doing because I believe
Right.
maybe those teams don't think they have staying power. In the NL East, the Mets are going to stub their toe a little bit. The Phillies, if they figure it out and they're a handful of games back, do you call this kid up to provide a spark offensively, especially on the base paths, because we know what he can do, stealing bases? Or do you wait and if you're 10, 12 back, late July, early August, and you realize we're not even going to make the wild card, do you call the kid up?
I think you need to go ahead and move sooner rather than later before it gets too late. Talking about Justin Crawford, Andrew Painter also on the pitching side. There's some talk about, when are they going to call him up? That's another issue. Those are the cards that you have in your hand right now.
Yeah.
And, sitting as reasonably close as they are in the division, what, 4 games back as
Yep.
we begin play here on a Tuesday.
Yep.
You're certainly not out of it by any means, and you don't want to lose touch with the pack and get too far behind. So I think those are some cards that they can consider playing. Maybe not before the All-Star break, but then if things start going, another long losing streak, you're going to have to consider that a lot sooner.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too if they're gonna, with the trade deadline approaching in July, if they're gonna turn around and try to get another arm. Like Wheeler's the stopper, right? Wheeler comes in when they have to stop that slide. Sanchez has pitched well. Nola's been banged up. Jesus Luzardo, who I mentioned last week, hey, grab him. NL Cy Young, plus 1800. As soon as I said that, kiss of death. He has back-to-back horrible outings. Now, I don't know if that's just an aberration, but they have a decent starting rotation when you include Nola. I just think their offense is always feast or famine. As you mentioned, they got a
Mhm.
lot of guys making a lot of money, and those are the guys that have to come through.
Yeah, and it's been, kind of a lineup that has been as stable as any in baseball. I mean, those guys have been there for a few years
Yep.
now, and they've had a track record of success. So it's not like you can say that this team doesn't have the talent to make it to the playoffs and go deep into October. So it's just a matter of everybody getting on the same page. We talked about some of the young guys possibly. We got a little bit of glimpse of the farm system and Mick Abel coming up, and having such a great start in his first time in his major league debut. So this is a team that's certainly not lacking for talent, and as we see throughout an entire season, it's 162 games.
Mm.
Maybe you're not going to have those extended losing streaks like the Phillies just snapped, but you're going to have ebbs and flows, and you're going to play well for a little while, and then you're going to play pretty crappy for a little while. And it's just a point of winning those games that are close, that you need to pull it out, and helping get over the hump when things are not going well.
Yeah, we'll get to the NLEs in a second when we kind of do the teams that we think might be buyers and sellers. But I have no idea what's going on with my Yankees. I mean, you lose 2 out of 3 to the Red Sox. Pitching's been horrible. They started 14-9. They're still 14 games over 500. 39-25, 25-16 since that start. Um, I think they should have taken 2 or 3 from Boston. I think once again, Aaron Boone kind of pushing the wrong buttons. I mean, Saturday's a great example, right? They're up 3-1 early. And Boston turns around. They score 9 out of the next 13 runs. He decides, I'm going to deploy Ian Hamilton in a 1-run game in the ninth. I can't justify that move. I really can't. Rodon has pitched well, even though the
Yeah.
first 5 the other day he didn't pitch well. But I think he's their saving grace. I think the Weaver injury hurts them as well. Yarbrough has given them some nice little lift, if you will. Right, you've got a little juice, a solid arm in the back of their rotation. I'm not concerned with the offense like others are. I'm just concerned with the pitching staff again.
Yeah, and I think every major league team has got concerns about whether their pitching staff can last the entire season. Interesting thing. I mean, some of the most durable starting pitchers coming into this season, Corbin Burns was one of them.
Yep.
Hardly ever had any sort of injury issues. Made every start for at least the last 3, maybe 4 years, and comes up with needs Tommy John surgery.
Yep.
You just can't predict. So you can never have. I mean, and goodness knows the Dodgers have tried to address any pitching woes with an excess of depth, and they're still in trouble. So I don't think anybody, no major league team at all, can feel truly good about the depth of their pitching staff. So it's a concern for everybody. But when you have, I mean, Rodon has pitched as well as anybody so far this season,
Yes, he has.
and Max Fried may be right up there too. And you're talking about the top 3 or 4 starters in all of baseball. So that 1-2 punch is going to carry them and can carry them throughout the rest of the regular season. And if they stay healthy, maybe even deep into October. So Will Warren has pitched well in spurts. I think the Yankees certainly, the pitching can be a concern, and Luke Weaver coming back will be huge for them. But as far as their woes versus anybody else's in Major League Baseball, I think the Yankees are in pretty darn good shape.
Yeah, that's why I don't panic. I mean, look, you look at their offense, Judge, Volpe, Wells, Bellinger, right? I didn't mention Stanton, rehab assignment. You got the
Right,
kid Rice. He's having a breakout year. Now, they're not gonna option this kid, so you can't do it, right? Because you can't play him at first base because Goldschmidt's there and he's playing
right.
really well. So Boone's gonna have to maneuver that a little bit. Speaking of the AL East, I don't want to spend too much time on your Baltimore squad, but I mean, my goodness, what I mean, is this just one of these down starts to what could be a bad year for Baltimore?
I don't know. We saw a little bit of a sign of life recently,
Right.
although it helps to be playing the White Sox
And the
when you need to
Yep.
sweep a series. And they had a nice road trip. I think the issue that we saw, you know, you could see, I could see coming into this season is, where's the starting pitching? Why don't you go out and get some starting pitching, bolster that pitching staff? I mean, Tomoyuki Sugano has been pretty good. Maybe their most consistent pitcher so far this season. So, okay, check that box. But
Right.
you needed depth. You can't, this staff, talk about injuries to pitchers. This pitching staff has been beset with injuries for the last several years, and yet they did not really do a whole lot. Let some key bullpen guys go, and then when your starters aren't able to go, more than 5 innings, and you end up having to rely on those relievers, middle relievers, and it makes everything just that much more difficult. So
Eflin's
Baltimore,
probably been their best pitcher.
yeah, yeah, and I mean he missed some time too.
Right.
But is Zach Eflin a number one starter
No.
for a playoff team?
No.
I can't see that
No.
happening.
No.
So this is a team that has to win, at least in my view, it has to win by outslugging and outscoring their opponents. And the offense has just been atrocious, really, this season. I mean, beyond what anybody thought was the worst case scenario. Now, some injuries to Kauser, Westberg, and guys like that, who are important parts of the team, did not help things. But Adley Rutschman has not hit well all season long. Gunnar Henderson, been hurt, has not been the player that he was, as dynamic as he was
Right.
a year ago. Ryan O'Hearner's really been the only guy that's been anywhere close to productive day in, day out. So this is an offense that really needs to improve. And if they do, it kind of papers over some of the holes that they're trying to patch in the pitching staff.
Boston calls up Roman Anthony. The Royals call up Jack Caglione. I mean, the kid only, what is he, turns around? He has 4 for 4 in his sixth
Yeah.
major league game, right? Yeah, the old man Perez still cracking. Bobby Witt Jr. with a 2-run shot for Kansas City. We're seeing some of these teams call up these guys because they're trying to sell tickets. They're trying to get, a fusion of youth. I mean, I don't know what you overall think of what's going on with Miami and the Marlins, because that can be a conversation for another day. And then
Yeah.
the Rockies, we knew they were going to be bad. I didn't think they were going to be historically bad. I
Yeah.
mean, we always get into okay, which teams do we believe are going to be buyers and sellers? Like, I think, I mean, the Rockies, to me, listen, I can just see them selling off. They might not. I don't know. You're talking about some potential trade value. Are they going to be able to bring in the haul of prospects for a team in a position that needs to add in the deadline? The White Sox, the Angels is always right there, and then you got the Marlins. I mean, they're the biggest trade deadline sellers in recent years. So, give me a team or two that you think is going to be really aggressive and just sell off.
Well, talk about the Rockies
Yeah.
first of all. I don't know that they have the talent to really get anybody back. I mean, Ryan McMahon may be the only guy on that roster that is worth, you know, trying to see what the market will bring, and people will want to buy. I mean, he's a pretty good defender, decent bat. So part of that, I think, is you need to have at least some talent that you're not holding back for the future. Now the Rockies have some good young players, but they're not trading them. The White
Right.
Sox aren't trading any of their young prospects that they just pulled in all of their other trades. I mean, you think Luis Robert may be the one guy on the White Sox that could bring back a decent return in terms of prospects. I think Miami probably has maybe more of an opportunity with a pitcher like Sandy Alcantara.
I was
But
just going to bring him up.
again, he's been terrible
I,
this season. So who's going to pay for? And I will stand up and say right now, Rich, at the beginning of the year, that was my soapbox for the Baltimore Orioles. I was like, they need a number one starter, a Cy Young winner. Sandy Alcantara is the guy they need to go get, and that's looked really foolish now because he's pitched to an ERA over 7 or something,
yeah,
whatever
real
it is
bad.
now. So I think he's got an opportunity to be better. But some of these guys, they need to show that they're worth teams coming out and giving up a prospect haul or whatever. Because I think there are a number of teams that might be willing to do that if they knew what they were getting.
It's a fair point. I mean, you mentioned Alcantara, 7.89
Yeah.
ERA. He has not won since April 12th. He actually won back-to-back starts. Since then,
Hmm.
he's been absolutely dreadful. I mean, and the other thing is sometimes you're not. I mean, look at the kid in Pittsburgh and his record, and he's not getting any run support. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it's just it's brutal to watch. I feel as though for the last 3 to 4 years we've had the annual Mike Trout kind of, where are we with Mike Trout? And I went through his numbers again yesterday on the air. And if you take away the missed time of the injuries, you're talking about a player that's maybe right around 460, 470 home runs, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you love to see him hit 400 with the Angels. Is it a pipe dream when you connect Trout to the Phillies? I mean, does Trout get moved? Does he finish his career with the Angels? What's your thought on that?
I I feel like Trout has made his preference known that he doesn't want to be traded. I mean, first of all, he's got the 5 and 10 rights, so he's not going to be traded without his
Approval.
approval.
Yep.
So there's that. He's locked up fairly long term, so
Yep.
whatever team would try to acquire him would be on the hook for a huge contract that the Angels certainly would not want to pay to get rid of. I mean, they're happy to have him, finish out his career as an Angel and go into the Hall of Fame with an Angels cap on. But so I think this is one of those situations where it's probably not going to be this year. It may not be next year, but Mike Trout may eventually just say, "All right, I can see the end
Yep.
and it's coming up. I'm not going to be a superstar." It may be that point in his career where he won't be, you know, I hate to maybe I'll think of a different player, but Pete Rose coming to the Phillies to help win a World
Sure.
Series kind of thing. He was not a dominant player by any means, but he provided, that little bit of spark to a team that needed it. And, that's, I think that's where, in my mind, if Mike Trout goes somewhere else to win a championship, to have an opportunity, heck, to even play in the postseason, my goodness, that we're getting robbed as baseball fans, not getting to see him perform in the postseason.
Yeah.
That might be the scenario that he could change teams um, down the road.
Yeah, and just for the viewing audience, 10-5 writes, if you got 10 years of major league service with 5 years with their current team, you can veto any trade. So that pretty much gives vets significant control over their career path. And I love how we can end it. Great transition on Pete Rose.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I was waiting to get you on because, again, I never try to wax poetic and pat myself on the back. But I said, when this man leaves God's green earth, that's when he's going to get reinstated for
Hmm.
eligibility into Cooperstown. Now, you are a Hall of Fame voter. You and I have had this conversation for years. Does this change your view, your thought on Pete Rose? Do you believe now? And it's unfortunate this happens after he passes, and it's just me. I think it was a gutless move by baseball, but whatever. He is now reinstated, which means now it's going to be interesting to see what the voters and what is it now, senior committee, correct?
Yeah, yeah, it's the oh dear, classic era committee
Classic
or
era.
something like that. That will be in 2027, I
Yeah.
think, next meeting.
But does it change your viewpoint at all on Pete Rose?
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't because it was just something, Rob Manfred. I would like to know the inner workings, and I think I may have a little bit of an idea. But I mean, he was asked just a couple years ago and asked to rule on Shoeless Joe Jackson. And, he basically said, because somebody dies doesn't mean that we need to erase what, the precedent has before that. When he said exactly that in reinstating Pete Rose,
Well,
Shoeless
now
Joe
why do you
Jackson,
think the
and all the rest.
180? Why do you think the 180 now?
I think the climate, the political climate,
That's what
the
I think
visit
too.
to the White House, and all of the everything
Pressure.
else that's going around baseball, nobody wants to be in the crosshairs of the current administration. And baseball is no different. Certainly, no business that makes money. Baseball has an antitrust exemption. We've talked a lot about that in the past. This dates back many, many years, even maybe 100 years now, and baseball doesn't want to lose that.
Mm,
And Congress is the one entity that can undo it. So baseball wants to lay low, doesn't want to cause any stir, and to me, it was a move that Commissioner Rob Manfred was just kind of sticking his finger up in the wind and say, which way are the winds blowing? Well, it seems like it's a positive thing for Pete Rose to get reinstated. I'll consider that. And in listening to the people that he listened to, who were apparently different from the ones he listened to
sure.
in the past years, he decided to make this move. I don't really think it does anything, Rich. And I think unless the Hall of Fame selectively picks a committee full of Pete Rose supporters in the 12 that are going to vote in December 2027, I don't think Pete Rose has a chance to get in because people know, in baseball, knew what he did, still feel very, very angry that he bet on baseball and strung the game along for so long, insisting that he didn't. That
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more personality and politics of baseball that go into the Veterans Committee votes than there is with the Baseball Writers Association. And all you need to do is persuade 8 out of 12 people on that committee. That's why the makeup of that committee will be very interesting to see when it considers names in 2027.
Well, that's the caveat, right? Because you guys, the writers, they're not going.
Yeah.
Pete Rose or Shoeless Joe aren't going on the writers' ballot. If Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson were on the writers' ballot, would you vote them into Cooperstown?
And you've asked me this before. I still say no,
Okay.
and the reason is, and I think I can justify it in a similar way with my position on the guys who were alleged to use PEDs.
PED steroid era. Yeah.
The Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, you know, were in an era when baseball did not test
Hmm.
for performance enhancing drugs. It was not specifically against the rules and with enforcement to back it up when they were playing. It was when Manny Ramirez was playing.
Right,
So
right.
therefore, Clemens, Bonds, I had no problem voting for. Have not voted for Manny Ramirez, A Rod, those guys. I see the same thing in Pete Rose. There was a rule and there was a punishment, and everybody knew if you gambled on baseball, you were going to get kicked out of the game. I don't think this changes any of that for me.
Yeah, it goes to the old adage, right? When we talk about, the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Character or the Hall of
Right.
Morals, but I understand, and like I've said, I've pivoted because I screamed at the top of my lungs when it came to the PEDs and the steroid guys and not getting in and Pete Rose and the gambling on
Hmm.
baseball and with the Reds and on the games. And um, it was just, the sign clearly states it, no betting, no gambling. Right. And I
Right.
still believe to this day, I think it was probably 89 or 90 right after Giamatti banned them. Um, and then Giamatti, I think, passed a couple weeks later. When
Yep.
Pete Rose was on, it might have been 2020 or Dateline, and that was his a couple years later. I think with Peter Ueberroth, that was his moment to come clean.
Yep.
And you're talking now. All right, yeah, he came clean 30 years ago. Like now, you've got your penance. We accept it, and I think it would have been a different story. It's very hard for me to sit here though and when you talk about the history of the game, just like the NFL, just like the NBA, and NHL at a lesser extent, like
Hmm.
if I can't, if I'm telling the story of the game, if I don't have your name in that story, to me, you're not Hall of Fame worthy. But now it's hard for me to tell the game of baseball, to speak the game of baseball, We're not talking about Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose, the accolades, the MVPs, the awards, the Gold Gloves, the career hits leader, right? And it's
Right.
just, I eventually think, and again, you know more than I do because you're a voter. I eventually believe all those guys that run or the cloud of suspicion, the Mitchell report, they're once one gets in, all of them are getting in. That we believe um, we can justify them having a spot in
Mhm.
Cooperstown, right? The Clemens, Ramirez, Rodriguez, on and on, Bonds. I eventually think they're going to get in, but as we said, you just have that asterisk. You have the note,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. That sort of stuff, and we've talked about that before about having a note on their plaque if they get in. Violated rules, was suspended. That sort of thing. You need to completely tell the whole story,
Right.
and I think too, Pete Rose is in the Hall of Fame in many of the artifacts and exhibits and all of that. And for Pete Rose supporters, I feel like that has to be enough. He doesn't, in my mind, he doesn't deserve to get a plaque in that particular area of the Hall of Fame reserved for those who've been inducted. So it's a fine line. And I'll tell you one other thing too, Rich. You're talking about if one gets in, does that start the snowball effect? I wrestle with this myself. What if Fernando Tatis, who got suspended for PEDs early on in his career, what if
Correct.
he goes on to have a 20-year career and not a hint of scandal, you know, after that? How do we judge those guys? That to me is going to be really, really tough to say. How is he different from A-Rod, from Manny Ramirez, all of these other guys that right now we say cheated and do not deserve to be in? At least the voters as a whole say that.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. I mean, he had that 42, what was it, 42, 43 home runs a couple years ago. Then he was suspended, right?
Hmm.
Didn't play, and now he's come back. And uh, it's, I feel as though every player, right, we can push our own narrative, and anyone can have their own agenda towards a certain player, specific player. I mean,
Hmm.
we know what, baseball writers for years, the old adage, pardon me, with Jim Rice, right?
Right.
In Boston. Um, we've seen it in the NFL. The NFL, I think, is a
Dick
little
Allen too.
Dick
Dick
Allen.
Allen was the guy that
Yeah.
the writers didn't
Eh,
like for whatever
It's
reason.
just,
Took
it's, I try to wrap myself around it where, how do I sit there and say, okay, if they didn't juice, if they didn't take steroids, prove to me their numbers would have been lesser than what they really are or were, if that makes sense, right? And it's, I mean, you go back in the 70s, guys were popping the greenies, right? I mean,
totally true. Right.
it, I mean, Keith Hernandez, I think Keith Hernandez is a Hall of Famer. Now, are people going to look at Keith Hernandez 84, 85, 86, 87 with the Mets when that whole team, that era was doing Coke, Strawberry and
Right.
Gooden? Like, I pulled up Gooden's numbers yesterday. His first 4 years, he won 91 games.
Ridiculous.
91 games. The rest of his career, I think over 10 years, he only won another 100, I think, 101 maybe. But, you know, Hall of Fame path, Strawberry, Hall of Fame path. But
Mhm.
we know what derailed their careers. These guys made a conscious decision to juice up, to take roids. So then, to me, I think that also has to factor in when you debate and you discuss some of these players. And you also have to kind of like split it down. Okay, well, prove to me that they're not hitting 50, 60, 70 home runs if they're not juicing. And what would their career have been? Are they still Hall of Fame worthy?
Yeah, and I think Barry Bonds is the classic example of that. In that he had almost a Hall of Fame career before he even left Pittsburgh. You
Hands
know,
down.
so he was there.
Hands down.
So yeah, it's so much conjecture. Everything's so subjective, and that's why I think, at least for as a baseball writer, why it is really, really hard and should be hard to get into the Hall of Fame is you've got to have 75% of all of
Yes.
those writers, agree that yes, you deserve to be there. It is not easy because, while there are criteria, how much you weigh each of those criteria, that the Hall of Fame gives you on the ballot, um, is different for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to be a fly on the wall with some of those discussions because I'm sure they're very, very heated, right? And everyone's trying to push their own, their agenda,
Hmm.
their narrative, their story. They're backing a player, they're dismissing a player,
Yeah.
so it's probably not for the faint of heart.
And the NFL is that's all it is it's all behind closed doors
Of
and
course,
lobbying and everything else, which, when people give baseball writers a hard time about the Hall of Fame, it's like, hey, at least we're transparent. You can see who I voted for.
that's
Nobody
a fair
knows what
point.
happens.
That
Nobody
that
knows what happens in the
That
NFL.
that's a very fair point. That I'll give you that. That is a very fair point. I mean, I don't beat you guys up too much, but yes, that's a very fair point. Of course, Steve Gardner, kind enough to join us middays with Q. Rich Quinones here. Give him a follow at Steve A. Garner. All right, my friend, excellent stuff. I know I held you too long. Hopefully, we can do it again next week. But I always appreciate you jumping on for a couple of moments.
Never too long chatting with you, Rich. Take
All right.
care.